Here we are. We're live. Good. Welcome to the 21 Agile Leadership Spotlight. And it is a huge pleasure of mine today to have two wonderful guests, Marita Fridjhon. I hope I pronounce it properly, Marita.
Close enough.
Now it's becoming complicated. Francois De Verde.
Well done.
All right. Welcome. Welcome to today's session, which is titled Systems-Inspired Leadership, which we'll come into in a minute. Before, let me just briefly introduce the two of you, and we could probably go on for an hour or so because you've got such an interesting, rich background. Marita is the co-founder of a company called CRR Global, which many people might know from the coaching space. It's the home of the famous ORSC program, ORSC curriculum. It's a leading coaching firm and the creator of the concept of relationship systems intelligence. What a wonderful, important word. We'll talk about this today too. Marita has academic degrees in medical and psychiatric social world, as well as family systems therapy. This is very interesting because it's really well-educated background, not just this sort of, I did a coaching course and now I'm into this. Probably very important to mention, while she lives in the US, she was born and grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era, and serving as a faculty member at Cape Town University, that probably influenced her research and creation in the field of systemic change, considering major cross-cultural diversity, an important topic we'll also probably touch base today. Francois De Verde from the Netherlands, an organizational psychologist and coach for leadership teams and whole organizations, looks back at 20 years of a leadership career at Royal Dutch Shell, where he served in various international executive and senior management positions. So Frank has a practitioner background. Marita is a practitioner in leadership because she holds basically together a large international platform and company. And Frank works today as a senior faculty member of CRR Global, co-delivering the curriculum as a front of the room leader, as it's called, and also as a supervisor for people going through the professional ORSC certification program. Both my guests today are co-authors of their new book, Systems-Inspired Leadership, which, as I already said, provides the context for our session today. Also, warm welcome to everybody who is watching now and participating live. Maybe just a short word on housekeeping. Feel free at any given time to provide us your questions and comments via your live chat. We'll have permanently an eye on them, and as time and context allows, we'll pull them in. So that's my pleasant job today, next to having a conversation with Marita and Frank. So once again, welcome, Frank, Marita. And let's get into the topic right away. Leadership, that's a big word we know since decades. And I think there are probably as many leadership flavors as we can just count. And I know the power of your approach, but maybe you could briefly start explaining to the listeners who might not yet be so much into the topic, what does actually systemic or systems-inspired leadership mean? What's this? What's the magic behind? What makes it different, and what is it actually about?
Basically, shall I start, Marita?
Sure.
Yeah, systems-inspired leadership is about tapping the collective wisdom. That's the key thing. So rather than, let's say, a top-down approach, also an approach where the leader is expected or presumed to know it all and gives direction. This is the capability to really co-create together. Where do we need to go to? And really leveraging all the information that's available of all the parties and even within the system itself.
Right. Okay. That's a
I think the piece that I want to add to that, it literally is that concept where we hold everybody, and it actually is part of the relationship systems intelligence, or RSI as well, that everybody is actually a voice of the system. And only one person can see only a fraction of the whole. So the place from which systems-inspired leadership can really expand the depth of solution provoking is that it can better observe the whole than through the eyes of so many others than only one person can do. So
that brings me already to the next topic. So that's already probably a very interesting, baseline which we can now use into the conversation, because this is actually a little bit against what we probably hear a lot about in leadership, where the heroic leader is probably the one we look up to, who gets probably rather promoted in organizations, and at the same time becomes probably a little bit of a bottleneck for themselves, probably also for the organization, especially for the future, because the leader who knows all, or let's say the human being who knows all, might not exist, but still we believe it must be this one person. And so for me, it's interesting. I mean, if we talk about the one and the other, what is then potentially a meaningful step? What are steps to get there, to move beyond this heroic leadership? If we just think about existing organizations, like,
well, there's one place that I want to tinker a little bit with. When we think of everything that is present in the world, whether it is a vaccine, or whether it doesn't matter what the final achievement is, not a single one of those things have been created by one heroic leader. It has always been systems inspired. What we're missing is the conscious intentionality with doing that, and is acknowledging the team that is behind. How many books have been written by university professors that actually were the research of the doctoral candidates? It's always been there. We now are looking at how can we create intentionality to be consciously going there, and to continue to acknowledge those who had input that shifted the stream.
So let me add to that as well, Mike. So a first step is to create awareness about it. So to be aware that you as a leader are not able to deal with a world that is changing so fast and is so complex. Yeah, take all the things that are happening with Corona. We don't even know what's happening in a week's time. And Corona is a mild version of what's going on to come. If we think about all the technology advances that will be there, the climate changes that will be there, maybe political developments, there's so much uncertainty. So just the awareness, I don't know, because I need to have much more information. That is a big realization. We think basically that leadership paradigm is not up for the 21st century anymore.
Right. So here's
Can I add one?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Yeah. And the second thing what you see is that most leaders are stressed out and burn out.
Right.
They get so much on their plate. They need to do everything. And they really do not draw from their source. They're really burned out. And that creates so many collateral damage, so to say. So that's also a reason why the leadership paradigm as we currently have really radically needs to switch.
Right. I wanted to put the pointer here to your book, which people can obviously then look up on Amazon. But I think initially you already write there is a certain, let's say, precursor for leaders to start working on themselves, right? You mentioned vertical development. It can't work without. The question is, Ches, to me that sometimes sounds like a catch-22, and there might be different people and maybe different types of leaders, like saying there might be the ones who are really keen on being the hero and they insist on being the hero and they're maybe on steroids. I don't know. They might not be easy to get on board. But what you just mentioned, I think that's a big one. Leaders who might show up as heroes are actually, feeling challenged, threatened, behind closed doors, as we sometimes say. And so they're struggling between, playing their role and potentially being faced with burnout. And so here's this question: what from your experience, where do you see this tipping point to get such leadership on board to investigate, to inquire that there could be more, that there could be relief? Not sure what your experience is. Uh, that's not a popular thing, right? For a leader to just acknowledge, it's actually true. I don't have the answers. I don't know where we're heading for.
That's a complex question with complexity in the answer as well, because it's also very culturally defined. There are certain cultures that want to have the person who has the information. There are other cultures that, so it's culturally, it plays out very differently. And one of the things that I have become aware of as we are, been talking about system-inspired leadership and in presentations since 2016 was the earliest course that I created. One of the biggest resistance pieces that I see is that it's not just the leader challenge, it is the challenge of the team member, because the team members have grown up in a culture where the leader has the answer. That is an enormous edge or challenge for the leader as well. How do you go to your team and begin to say some of what you just said, Mike? I don't have the answers here. Any ideas? Not everybody is going to land immediately, slam bang, into the system-inspired leadership paradigm. There's a building of it that takes trust, and in some situations will take time. So we've got to meet the team and the leader where they are, and see what they can begin to do. So, but it's a challenge on both sides. That's something that's gotten very clear.
Yeah, it is a complex topic. And I'm already pulling in a question we have here from the audience. Natya, whom I actually know from ICF Chapter Austria, brings here the topic. I'm not sure even if it's even the same, systemic leadership and systems-inspired leadership. That could be another question. But, what's the role of a leader in systemic leadership then?
Now, there are many roles of leaders, but if you talk about the leadership, there's a big question on where do we all want to go to? And so given what's the purpose of the organization, given the context that is there, where do we want to go to? And how to do that? And the outer role, as we call that, of the leader in systemic leadership is to facilitate that particular process. Where to go to, and not doing it top down. Hey, let's go here, but let's explore. This is the direction we want to go. How do you see that? What are some reactions? What are some experiences? Right. And then it's not even only the information that comes to the surface on which you decide, but it's also that process, the process of listening to it, slowing it down. And then in a way, as we call it, the answer will come automatically. It's already there. It only needs to be revealed. So it's a very much a catalyst function there.
I love the question, because there's huge complexity in that question as well. In RSI, Relational Systems Intelligence, we're talking about one of the principles is that systems or teams rely on roles for its execution. That's the place where leadership is a role. But the role of leadership also belongs to everybody else. Because there are we see it in situations where I'm going to give an example from an ancient and older culture of Aboriginals, where in the morning, when they sit around the campfire, they will bring the children in to ask them to share their dreams, because they believe that our dreams have the answers. They also believe that children hasn't been contaminated yet by the grown-up way. So the dreams that the children bring, they hold to be the clearest. That's an example of insight, awareness, and content brought by the kids who in that moment are stepping into the role of leader. that's the piece. The role of leader is exactly what Frank talked about, that there is a designated outer role that has its description of what you need to be able to do. However, at any given moment in time, when you're looking at any of those specifics, you need to be able to go to the stakeholder, whether it's the client that you're working with, or whether it's the team member that is directly sitting in front of you, or the whole team. So that is the complexity. But when we interviewed the leaders that actually you will see interact throughout the book, one of the things that they said was what Frank talked about earlier, that there is a out breath, that they don't feel like they have to carry it alone anymore, but that they can go to everybody and get input. And then the place where we intersect sometimes with the challenge that the teal movement had was that in teal, it often was felt like no solutions get taken. No, the buck does continue to stop somewhere. That's not going away. But the deeper investigation of where that buck stops, that's a collective process.
Beautiful. That reminded me immediately. I mean, I love this Aboriginist story because it reminded me immediately on how organizations might go for innovation, right? Because that's the children, the those who are not confronted with any past. Although past plays a role, it's another concept, but in this case, to create the future, it's just like, let's support them and bring them to the table.
I can tell you many different stories about kids that show up next to their moms on a video call, where when I asked the kid, how are you doing? She said, I'm okay, but I'm really worried about my mom. I just told her she needs some rest, because the kid knows more about that technology that needs to happen than the mom did. So the kid could step in and go, Mom, let's take a break. You need to go and rest a little bit. Let me do that. Can you feel again how it's not the outer role of mother that is the leader in this one. It's the kid that steps into something that then becomes the leader. It's that kind of concept that plays out across the board all the time. We just need to, like Frank also said, bring awareness to it.
Awesome.
And consciously leverage it.
And I think it requires, to be in that outer role, requires a set of competencies. Yeah, it's not a capability that is simply there. There's quite some technology, so to say. We have captured those in 5 competencies that we advocate that systems-inspired leaders have. And by adopting them, the byproduct is that you also will grow as a human being. It is like that. For example, one of them is seeing, hearing, and sensing the system. I think that's such a barrier for people. The moment you start seeing everything that is happening as an interdependent web of relationship, interdependent entities, things will change. Change for you as a human being.
That brings me to my next topic. First of all, Nadia, I hope you got something out of the answers, because it was a complex questions, which brings you maybe to the next idea.
And I just want to encourage everybody to bring the questions because we love the interactive process, and this too needs to be systems inspired. If Frank and I and you might continue to talk and nobody has input, then we actually are betraying the very topic that we are tackling. So that's cool.
And I want to be really careful about the jargon we are using, the words, because listeners might not be familiar with. Some might be, we don't know. Thank you, Nadia. So here is the response. Tapping into one of these topics, Frank, you just mentioned it, this sort of listening to the system, becoming aware of. And Marita, you mentioned teal as one topic. A lot of discussion has been on purpose for organizations over the past 10 years or so, as far as I observed. And a couple of frameworks, methods became popular for more self-organized companies and organizations approaching purpose in a different way. One of them, for example, just giving an example, I'm not picking on it, like holacracy and variations on sociocracy. And what is interesting to me, when I look at their stances and how they approach it, it has been usually twofold. One, the freedom for the individual, and that's quite interesting, the individual, and not the relationships. And second, offering a very, I would say, deep approach for processing tensions, processing objections, and going more into the intellectual part. So whenever I observe these things and sometimes worked on them myself, I became challenged intellectually. But now that comes my question. I know your approach goes into a little bit of a different, nuanced direction. I'm mentioning the levels of reality. And that basically, brings me to my next question. What is it that organizations, teams, leaders can also look at beyond just facts, things to do, objectives? And probably know what I'm pointing at.
I think, I think that yes to all of those. And somewhere there does need to be a consensus reality list, if you will, of findings, because in consensus reality, how things play out in the everyday world, there we find the things that we need to do next and the challenges that we are currently facing. Research bring it to us. Deloitte studies bring it to us. So absolutely, those kinds of things, systems inspired, because that information comes from collecting information across the globe. So we need to have those. When we begin to focus more closely on our team, our organization, the question then is, how do we hold those outcomes that we are striving for, but how do we do it from a being perspective or from a less strategic perspective? Because even from a neuroscience perspective, when we go to a strategic mind, the relationship and dreaming or creative mind kind of shuts down. And when Frank uses the word hearing, sensing, and seeing the system, that's the piece that we want for leaders to become more familiar with. Hearing the system, we always do. We hear the words, but 90% of intention is not carried through the words. It's carried through how it is presented. I can say I love you and it's not going to land. So so that's the sensing. Seeing, particularly when we are on video like this as well, really easy. You can see how the constellation changed the moment Tanya came in. You actually did the sensing when you go back and say, did we answer that question? Is there anything? Can you feel how you are already doing it? So now just how do we bring it more deliberately? And that's the thing. You need to go back when you want to use hear, feel, and sense, hear, feel, and see. Then you need to be able to go back to the team and go, I noticed something just shifted.
Right.
You've got to take it back to them, because the moment you make up your own mind and your own interpretation, you're top down again, even if you ask.
And I was just thinking about a typical scenario like happening in every company, maybe even for the beginning of the year, right? Here's a town hall meeting, and leaders might walk into the big room, and I don't know, hundreds of people in a room, don't know. And they might start with the typical agenda. So this is our goal for today, right? And this is what we're going to work on. These are the objectives. And people might start working on this stuff. So we know where that goes to. There's little soul, there's little spirit in such an event. Nobody cares for things that are anyway happening, but they don't care for. And the other approach, and that's how I understood it, would be like saying, approaching people in a way as their people, as a system, to say, first of all, providing inspiration, and then getting people together. Like, how do we want to create the day together? How do we want to be in the near future, and all these things.
Yeah, no, but it's lovely you're pointing there, Mike, because the whole thing of soul, that's a lot around to do with how energy, what energizes you, and if you think about, let's focus on the individual, for example. What is driving you as an individual? What puts you on fire? I think there's a beautiful phrase there that is, what is my calling? What am I called to do? And there's a really deep paradox, because what am I called to do? That is something you have not defined yourself. That is something which is bigger than yourself, which is outside. In our terminology, we call that the third entity. So that is something that is the bigger whole, so to say. We believe that you can sense how you can contribute more to a bigger whole. Not in a way that you are a slave or that you are a servant to it, but yet that you are inspired to it. And it is that connection, both within you as an individual and as an organization, that you can unlock. And it's like with questions. So what is exciting us? Where do we want to go? What do we want to create together? Rather than an empty objective, which is often a number. Let's go for 1 billion turnover or so. That's not exciting people. It's much more, let's create a fantastic experience for a customer in this way, such that they can provide wealth for their community or their families.
Yeah.
Let me just add something there, Mike. When Frank just talked about the third entity, that's a really critical piece. And I think that is one of the things that we actually are contributing to modern systems thinking. When we are talking about that is, and it's a core piece of our training as well in organizationalism systems coaching, but that we're talking about that there is a wisdom in the system itself beyond the individual team members. I can tell you that we have done this kind of work, and I myself as a leader of this company globally, where you can get everybody's input and then put out a chair and say, but you've got to get everybody's input first. But if you then go, and when you go and sit in that chair, you are the voice of Agile. You are the voice of CRR Global. What does it want? We did that when we needed to downsize at the previous recession. We asked the system itself. We have done this with global companies, with stakeholders in different parts of the world. There's something in that answer that comes from that system itself. Or what does the team want? What does it need? And then ask, well, what does the team want us to know? It sounds strange, but it's worked in every single environment, from medicine to banking to Agile that we've ever encountered. Because people, the moment they sit down in that chair, they realize that they are no longer speaking for themselves. They are channeling and bringing something different. That's the collective wisdom. So that a version of that. Now, how do I introduce it? Begin slowly. You may not take them through that whole thing in the beginning yet, but you can just say, well, that's what we're thinking. What do you think our team, if the team could talk, what would it say? And then begin to gradually move in. But can you feel how the leader has to be evolved, have to be grow themselves, and then begin to, in minimal viable edges, introduce and bring the team on board as well. And usually there's at least one team member that knew this stuff already. So then that makes it easier as well.
Lovely you say that, Marita. My experience is actually that working with constellations really helps. Really moving around. If we talk about seeing the system, what's seeing the system? It's how people constellate around a certain topic. And you can also constellate, for example, where do we want to go to? And then really stand really in the place of the team or the organization. Let's go there, feel into it. And this bodily experience will really help. And if people are skeptical about it, the invitation is, let's try it. Let's try it out and see what it gives you. Because like Marita said, and I have the same experience, I have not met any organization or any team I've worked with where they did not get any value out of this.
Right.
Yeah.
It still brings me, I mean, first of all, again, pointing to the book, because the exercise is described in here, and you get more out of it if you read it, and there is way more to go for. But it brings me still to the question of, and Marita mentioned it before, culture. both of you have a tremendous wealth of experience globally and with different companies. And I mentioned before Shell with Frank, and Shell is probably not a company where people are, just only spirit, coming from a spirit point of view, but it's a tough business, right? And so, of course, this question is, do you see from your experience major cultural differences or even
Yes.
a little bit of resistance for people working with these kinds of considerations?
I think so. And for this, it's really important to look at the work that's been done and the research around cross-cultural intelligence or cultural intelligence, because the
Yeah.
countries that are from that perspective classified, or we can talk about as we cultures. It's not an I culture.
Mm,
Those cultures tend to go to this easier.
mm,
The United States, for example, is an I culture. It's a me culture, more difficult. Asia, Japan is a we culture.
mm.
And even in some of the Asian countries where where it can be talked about as a dictatorship, because it's we centered, it works because even that is a stand for the best for all of us. Not always right. I'm not saying we need to be, but you can see even in extreme cultures where if it's a we culture, it's a very different piece. It's easier to
Mm,
get there. Now,
mm.
there we struggle to get people to the EQ part of the
Yeah,
emotional intelligence. What's
yeah.
going on for me? Because I'm so aware of what's happening for everybody else. So,
Mm.
but yes,
Yeah, great. And let me add to that. So, in my experience, actually, what you described may be the starting point, but there's such a desire for people to be who they truly are. It's even got a brand to be authentic. So it's so important in a world that's so complex. And what I see is actually people are relieved that they can throw away their masks and their armor, and that they can be themselves. Yeah. So
Right.
we used to be with the ties, etc. All the ties are gone basically in the cultures I know of. So people really to become human beings. I think that is a big desire, and it's actually quite edgy for people to take step by step to do that, because it feels scary. But at the same time, they love it. They
Right.
really desire. They look for it.
Right. I can pretty well imagine because I've been at similar, situations with different approaches. Like, for example, using Lego. You might know Lego
Yeah,
Serious Play, right? It's
yeah.
a famous
yes,
They
method
love
of
it. Yeah,
creating
don't
strategy. And some people might be worried. Oh God, we can't bring our board members, Lego, but they love it
they
because
love
yeah,
it.
it's
yeah,
playful.
Absolutely,
They've been kids.
absolutely.
They have kids, so it's sometimes
Yes,
quite
yes,
interesting to
yes.
maybe face your own fears and try to become more aware of as a consultant, coach, or leader,
But I
Yeah,
also say
what to talk about.
we use it a lot with my leadership interventions. Also, that
Yeah,
people tell
yeah,
stories and they
yeah,
share their favorite piece
exactly.
of music.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's also listening to the favorite piece of music really
exactly.
adds to the personality and the experience. Really, people want to expose themselves.
yeah. It's so interesting that ability to. So we're going to see more and more influence from neuroscience, I believe, because the science there really takes us to the place where, when I'm busy with imaging mind and dreaming mind and relational mind, I'm in a different place, from a place of creativity from where I am in strategic mind. So when people begin to be frustrated in the strategic conversation, that's a really good place to go to imaging mind and dreaming mind. What I see more now, there's another Aboriginal tradition, I can't remember where it originates now, that is what they do is dialoguing with questions. That now is beginning to happen in organizations where there is a regular when they get stuck strategically on a situation, then there is for 15 minutes, let's dialogue with questions. And it's simply, and you would be amazed within the first minute, the question already begin to have an answer. It's not, why don't we, have we thought of doing, and fill in something. It suddenly become, have we thought of doing this? That's an answer already. So then just gently pull them back. No more questions. Over 15 minutes, themes begin to emerge. And with those creative themes, you can go back to strategic. It's not about modularizing and taking away strategic, period. It's not. Strategic must come back. But come back to imaging, sensing, feeling, mind, and from there, dream things out of the box, and then come back with themes from that.
Yeah.
It's that kind of play.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Reminds me on a quote I got from a quite popular management researcher and author, Hal Gregerson, who referenced a guy called Elie Wiesel. You might know, an author who wrote something like, in the word question, there is a beautiful word. It's called quest. The moment we have answers, there is no dialogue. And questions unite people, answers divide them.
Yes.
That was an abbreviated version, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah,
yes.
Nice.
Interesting one.
Yes.
Now, I mean, again, if anybody has questions, please feel free to bring them in, because we are happy to have a dialogue with you whom we don't see at the moment. But as long as we don't see any further questions, I wanted to touch this term a little bit now that we went into the material a little bit later. Relationship systems intelligence might now be easier to define where we just came from. Because it's really this question, what is that? Most people know emotional intelligence, which is already a challenge, right? But what is then relationship systems intelligence? What is this magic behind this
it
word?
is that piece that we talked about earlier, is one of the things that might help is when you think about a team and you think about them connected through a web of strings, so that they're all connected and each one of them have their own, they can pull the string and then have the relationship systems intelligence lives in that web of connection. That is the system itself. That is the collective wisdom. So that's where relationship system intelligence comes from. When EQ is looking at how much and how well do I, abbreviated form, do I know myself and what's going on over here? And social intelligence is really knowing this, but also being responsive and aware of what's happening over there with you. Relationship systems intelligence, RSI, is finding out what that relationship between us. I mean, if we were to say, okay, you've got questions, we've got answers. If we were to ask this system that is the three of us, what does it know that we don't know? We will get different responses. It's that piece. And I will often, when people are, sort of joking about and go, what is that so California? I will go, yeah, if it's too kumbaya for you, let's not do it, but just look and see how others are. So, I often, it happens, it depends on style as well. So I often will joke a little bit and then go there. But that's the piece that I think we've untouched so far.
Right. Love that. And I think it's really relevant. I can imagine, I'm just thinking about many organizations tend to look at their company and just saying, hey, we need to be more innovative, right? We need to be better at creating. And by the way, I mean, looking at Deloitte's research last year, the biggest issue of CEOs this time is talent. We need talent on board.
Sustainability.
Exactly. But this is not just adding resources, the terrible word, human resources. This is actually intentionally or deliberately creating a new space. And I was just thinking, shifting the culture of an organization obviously can benefit from such an approach of consciousness, because, you can't just reinstall a new culture. Because culture is doing, and doing comes from a sort of deep understanding.
So you see, cultures are basically the response on challenges organizations had. So
Exactly.
if the challenges change, the culture will change and has to change. And I would
Right.
like to build on what Marita so beautifully said on the relationship systems intelligence. So one thing we say, so from my perspective, for leaders to really acknowledge what systems are is the biggest hurdle. Yeah. So, and we hold that there's everyone that speaks is a voice of the system.
Mm.
So it's not an individual voice, but a voice of the system. And I think everyone can relate to the experience in a meeting that you want to say something and then someone else says it. And that is basically relationship systems intelligence in action. There is this system that Marita was talking about, this web of relationship, and it needs to have channels to express itself. But it can't express itself as an entity. It
Yeah.
needs to have these various parts. And to be aware of that, and it can also be then as a result that you as an individual voice something that is difficult for the organization or the team to hear because you know it needs to be spoken. And that's what we feel now that if that's relationship system in action, and that also creates you a lot of value as an organization.
Right. And what is interesting, Marita, you wanted to add
No,
something.
I was just going to, what Frank just said also reminded me of that role thing that we talked about before. So the outer role is the CEO, but there might be an inner role that I play or have as the disturber or as the out of the box thinker or whatever. Each one of us have internal roles as well. And those are the things that sometimes frustrate us as leaders. So then we want to get rid of that person. But who was it that said a while back already, you can fire the person, but you cannot fire the role?
Nice.
When that signal of out of the box thinking or disturber, when that keeps on showing up, it will only repeat itself through a next person because the system wants it to be paid attention to. And that is actually the place of our next evolution. So how do we see conflict as a box that got thrown around and by now it's dusty and everything like that? But inside it, if we carefully open it, there is the gem of what we need to do next. So it really is that place that it just, I was thinking about, you can fire the person, but you
Right.
can't fire the
Right.
role from that perspective. Yeah.
Nice.
I sense an interesting follow-up question here, but I will keep it for a while because, again, seeing what's coming in here, there is another question from Mona, and I would rather, prefer to pick this up. It's an interesting one, right? Like, how can this relationship systems, intelligent organizational relationship systems, can serve us the most? And where do you see a difference to enterprise agile coaching? I'm not so picky on the words, right? But I know, Marita, you have a
I
lot of
am.
connections into
She
the world,
is. I am.
and so, yeah, whoever
Yeah.
wants to pick it up.
Mana, thank you. That's a great question. And we actually have created a course in where we bring the principles of RSI and some of the ways in which we execute on it together with Agile Enterprise Coaching. Because that really is, even in the Agile world, it's a very advanced form of coaching where it literally is the enterprise itself that's the client with many different systems and nested systems. I think the place where those two, in our experience, came together is in the manifesto. One of the places that is being described, one of the points that's being described is Agile is about, and I may not get it right, and it's a shorter form, people and process, people and help me.
Interactions. People and
and
interactions over processes and tools.
process and tools. And I think in the rapid evolution of Agile, process and tools is still high. And what we bring to that is that the people and relationships, and how do we execute on process and tools through the fact that relationship matters and through those 5 principles. So I think that that's where it is.
Spot on. because I mean, what you just picked is the very first sentence. I mean, there is a precursor even, but it's the first statement of this whole
Yes.
Agile
Yes.
foundation. So there is obviously, it wasn't, somewhere else. It wasn't, the other way around, like saying, yeah, first of all, come
Yes.
frameworks.
Yes.
But this is what we experience in the markets. Probably that's where
Yes.
Mona's question or challenges might come in,
And
because we're missing.
if I can
Yeah,
just play to that, I think the challenge comes from the enterprise that hires an
mm,
agile coach because
right,
they are known for getting things done quickly. And
right,
somehow we, the agile coach, become inducted and try to perform and keep up. When we were designing the course and as we were working with it, those are some of the things that really stood out. Is that the pressure under which they need to interact and deliver is part of what makes it so difficult to. And actually, that's true for every leader. How do I slow down and focus on relationship and the things that actually is the currency of all organizational success? How do we slow down to do that in order to go fast?
wonderful. I hope, Mona, that answered your questions, or at least gave you a first impression, an idea to move further and dive
That's a
deeper.
that's a big piece as well, yeah.
And
And I'm glad that
and
it's here because I'm so aware of how the enterprise coaches are different and navigate the field very differently. I
yeah,
didn't realize
yeah,
until we really started working with that. So I want kudos to you all. Good
right,
stuff.
The
beautiful.
thing that I could maybe add there as well, that relationship systems intelligence is basically it can be in a team, it can be an organization, but it's also very much focused on the ecosystems. So it's really all the interdependencies, and that's in a way the next step. And look, all of our challenges are actually beyond organizations, whether it's producing the vaccine or whether
Right.
it's really dealing with the climate crisis.
Yeah.
It's all very interdependent. So this whole notion will help us to really get much more collective view on things and also tap all the wisdom that's there.
Right.
And also to Mona again, and I think it's an example that I give in the book. But in the situation with the enterprise coaching, that is a place to how do you design it so that you work up to the place where you can actually go to the enterprise entity itself. We've done that numerous times with mergers and acquisitions, where that is the enterprise that you're working, the new emerging. And both the two or the three companies that are involved in the merger are still so seated in what they are losing and don't want to lose. So there's a slow ramping in that direction. But then the final part of that is the place where you might be able to sit down and ask them, what does the enterprise know that we don't know? What does it want from us?
Nice.
And I have had the most skeptical people come back and go, that question gave us more information than anything else we've done. But it was a long process. You can't get there. You've got to go step by step and begin to prep them for the fact that there's different information somewhere else.
That's awesome. I've sat literally on a call this morning, where we were introduced into the cultural background of a large company, and for those who are from this company might now know whom I mean. And they were basically pointing to the big back two companies their current entity was emerging from, and internally they're still having these two cultures. It's still this us versus them
I
and
know.
everything. And
Somebody
so,
is the big bad wolf.
yeah, exactly. So big topic and probably super important and
I
helpful.
was in many spaghetti mergers, so
Yeah,
there's even
right.
there's so many companies coming together.
We are already 50 minutes into our beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed. Hope you do too.
Yeah.
But there is still something we didn't touch it. I would love to, because this work, systems inspired leadership, is not only about sailing in nice calm waters. It's actually, I would say, facing the truth, or facing, how do you sometimes call it, the roar of the lion.
Lion's
And
roar. Yes.
and I want to point to this concept, because it's a concept on its own, you're building upon and developed it further, which is called deep democracy. we already mentioned voices, hearing voices, and with democracy, we have this understanding. All right, the majority counts, right? Have a vote, and majority then decides. But that doesn't bring us to further intelligence, right? So how is deep democracy potentially coming in and playing out for leaders? I'm not adding more details because I leave it up to you. And I'm just making up a scenario, right? It's about change. It's about facing, marginalized voices.
Let's first acknowledge that the word deep democracy is coming from Arnold Mindell, and he's someone who has really informed us on how to approach things. But the essence there is that in every voice, there's a piece of wisdom. And it also links very closely to what we call the systems-inspired rule. Everyone is right, only partially. And that is a very radical rule. Because if you start adopting that, you're going to be aware that everything you think and what's the truth is only partial truth. And also what all other people say is true, even of your biggest opponent or your biggest irritant. So can you see the piece of truth there? And that's also the huge difference with the democracy as we apply it currently, because it's the majority votes, but the people who are the minority, that voice has been silenced. And of course, like Marita said, the buck stops somewhere, we need to move on. But how can you benefit from the wisdom that is also in the people who said no to a proposal? Because there is wisdom. And how can you convert it? How can you build on that? How can you therefore find an even better solution?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Frank. These days and in years past, we've had to be careful with the word democracy because it means different things in different countries and cultures. So for me, it is really about maintaining the essence that there is information leveraged from the whole for the benefit of the whole. How politically it plays out and held, that's not a domain that I want to address on this call and in this situation. So I want to be sensitive, but I think that's the place, is that there is, and again, autocratic or whatever we want to call it, manifestations and we-centered cultures look different from democracy in democratic countries. So there's an essence to what that is that has a lot of complexity. So, but yeah, it really is about input, and then we take it a little bit further to how do we then get information from the system itself that we can build for.
Right. This is one of these so powerful approaches for leaders and organizations, right? To basically empower the system to go into a dialogue. It can be a challenging dialogue, but it's actually inviting every perspective and then working with that. As far as
and there's a complexity to that as well, because I can with my CEO hat on, I can have deep democracy with my global management team, and I can have deep democracy with faculty, and we can do all of those. But when you really sit down, how do we practice deep democracy with all our stakeholders, our alumni, our community? Deep democracy, when you really live it, and that's where enterprise coaching gets so complex. When you really live it, there is the number of nested stakeholders systems is massive. And we have to begin to educate those systems to bring their own practice of input from everybody that can then come back to the leader body or to the faculty.
I want to point to the book here again. I put it already on my camera, but for those who are interested in more, that brings you to a page on CRR Global where you see more resources around it. I think there is even a trial read, if you call it, so a few pages to take with you, and then interviews and everything. What's your I mean, we're now in January. So what's your, let's say, ideas for this year? You know, I can imagine it's a major milestone for both of you and for the organization around ORSC and everything, CRR Global and Frank's company. What's going to happen around this work of systems-inspired leadership?
I think there are several dreams. I think one of them is that we will develop a curriculum for leaders on systems-inspired leadership. And then there are obviously the applications of those in corporate environments, in workshops and stuff, and also the leveraging of coaching for leaders to become more systems inspired. And Frank, there's a couple more things up our sleeve. Go for it.
No, I think first of all for us, and thank you also for giving this opportunity, Mike. We want to talk about it, yeah, to spread the word, to make people aware that this is there. It's really different. It's new. It's innovative, and what I think or we think stands out, it is very practical. So we talk about a complex problem that is really where the world is being faced with, how to take that further. We have offered something really practical, how to do it, 5 competencies. There's also a test available where you can see where your current level of systems-inspired leadership is. And from that, we know, and that's also part of systems-inspired leadership approach, new things will evolve.
Yes.
There will be a demand, there will be questions that we are not aware of now that will evolve this whole concept. And that's what we are driving for. And it would be lovely, like you said, Marita, that we can offer the curriculum much more broadly to a bigger group of people, because we really think that will help to make a difference in the world.
That's beautiful. I want to point people also to your website, to CRR Global, where there is more information to be found, maybe to watch out for new things coming in and also seeing all the other offerings. I love the conversation with you. It's something which you bring into the world, which is so highly needed everywhere. Agile, we talk about organizational transformation, or is this digital transformation? Markets are being disrupted permanently. So at the same time, we've got social challenges. I mean,
yes,
we don't need to mention any of the topics we can't hear anymore. But what I think you always talk about is we can become more skillful in interacting with each other. So again, pointing to systems, relationship intelligence, and at the same time creating a better future together, and basically using the wealth of capacity we have.
I think there's one thing that I want to bring out is that systems-inspired leadership requires courage and bravery, because it also means that I need to be able to say, I'm sorry, I missed that. And don't worry about that mistake, because we're going to prototype from it. But it is about being able to call my own places where, we could have done this differently. I think that is something that's critical. But on top of that, I think that part of our role as leaders and leadership, that the role belongs to the system, is to do more of catching each other right and bringing the positive. When you look at the 2 challenges of sustainability and creating the sense of belonging, if we just continue to push without acknowledging where we failed, and with absolutely acknowledging and kudos for the places where we got it right, if we don't do those things, sustainability is not possible, and relationships will fall flat out of the basket. And without that, we lose the currency that makes everything possible.
You can maybe add there that from my perspective, what I really love is from systems-inspired leadership, if we really go back to our potential, either as individuals or as organizations, we know that the answer is there. And collectively, we can service this answer. It's waiting to be revealed. And there's some technology around how to do that. And it really creates what we call third entities that are in better shape, healthier, and also organizations that are healthier. And hopefully the world that is healthier.
I want to leave with a kudos to you, Mike. I'm going to out you here. You were a great example of system-inspired leadership because you're the leader of this call. We've been talking about it for a while. We've changed the date. And then yesterday when I tested it, I wrote you something and said the link didn't work or something. You came back with I'm sorry, in the process of all it didn't change. But you came in taking ownership and immediately responding with fixing it. That is some of the other qualities that's needed, is to be able to go, I missed that. Sorry, here it is. And so you did that. You walked the talk of that one. So kudos to you.
Thanks so much. Marita, Frank, thanks so much for having been our guests today. I think that was a co-creation. So things pointing to it. It's, not one single person being a leader.
That's right. That's right.
I still love the book from Peter Senge, the learning organization thing, Fifth Discipline, and I believe we need a learning society. I think your work puts such an amazing, layer around this idea, which makes it actually accessible and workable. And I wish you an amazing time this year to make this happen, and from many more opportunities to learn about each other's paths in this direction.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks for your time, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for having attended, visited, and we'll also let you know about contacts so you can follow up with questions afterwards in case you learned something and want to know more. Thank you very much.